There is a moment right before transformation begins when the world becomes strangely quiet, not because life has stopped, but because something inside you is finally ready to listen, ready to hear what you have been avoiding, resisting, postponing, diluting. And tonight, I want you to stay with this silence for a little longer than usual. Notice what it does to your breath. Notice how your shoulders soften without your permission. Notice how a part of you that has been tired for years suddenly feels seen. This is where manifestation truly begins. Not in the rush, not in the fear, not in the desperate search for the next technique, but in this inner pause where you meet the truth you've been carrying all along. Maybe you've asked yourself why your desires feel close and distant at the same time. Why sometimes you feel powerful, aligned, almost overflowing with clarity, and then without warning you fall back into doubt, into that quiet panic that whispers, "Why isn't it happening for me?" You're not wrong for feeling this way. You're not broken. You're not lacking discipline. You're simply living in a world that taught you to chase everything at once, to multiply desires before embodying even one, to collect spiritual concepts without grounding them in your identity. And so the mind becomes scattered, floating from technique to technique, craving certainty but never fully entering the state where certainty is born. What you call lack of manifestation is often just lack of inner proof. Proof that you can hold the feeling of one fulfilled desire long enough for the world to reshape itself around it. Neville Goddard never described manifestation as luck or divine favoritism. He spoke of it as an internal act, an identity shift, a quiet but deliberate acceptance of a new truth. And he was uncompromising about this. You don't manifest because you want. You manifest because you assume, because you feel the realness of the desire before the evidence arrives. Bruce Lipton confirms the same principle from a different doorway. The subconscious accepts patterns only through repetition and emotional authenticity, not through pressure, not through frantic effort, through felt reality, through a sustained inner tone. The universe doesn't respond to your wishes, it responds to your inner certainty, the one that lives beneath your words, beneath your doubts, beneath your practiced affirmations. That's why one fulfilled desire can teach you more about the law than years of consuming information. There is a hidden insecurity that few people dare to admit. They want everything at once because they fear choosing one thing and being disappointed. They fear committing to a specific end because what if it doesn't happen? What if they invest emotionally and receive nothing? So they scatter their imagination across 10 different desires, 10 different timelines, 10 different identities, and divided attention always leads to divided results. When you avoid fully embodying one state, you never experience the naturalness Neville spoke about. Naturalness, the moment when the wish stops feeling extraordinary and starts feeling inevitable, is not reached through intensity. It is reached through devotion, through staying long enough, through breathing inside the desire instead of visiting it occasionally and hoping it becomes real. Manifestation is not a technique, it is a craft. You learn the craft by making one desire real within you, not externally, but internally. First, you feel its realness. Then you let that feeling become familiar. Then you begin to notice how that inner familiarity starts spilling into other areas of your life like ink through paper. This is how you transfer identity. This is how you build inner authority. This is how you create a life that reflects your inner state instead of contradicting it. But to do that, you must stop being a spectator of spiritual theory and become an experimenter. You must test the law through imagination, through revision, through the discipline of assumption, not to prove something to others, but to prove something to yourself. So before we go deeper into the 8 chapters ahead, I want to invite you into a simple, intimate awareness. Take a slow breath. Feel your chest rise. Feel your chest fall. Notice the space between breaths. The still point. That still point is where creation happens. That still point is where you install new identity. That still point is where the inner world becomes the only authority. You don't need to force anything. You don't need to perform spiritual strength. You don't need to pretend confidence. You only need to feel what it's like in the body, to know that manifestation is not outside you. It begins here. It begins now, in this quiet acceptance of your own power. This is the art of making it real. And tonight you learn to make one desire so deeply real within you that reality itself has no choice but to follow. There is a subtle tension that lives inside anyone who has been trying to manifest for a long time but feels their results remain inconsistent. It's the tension of wanting so much, so deeply, that your attention becomes scattered without you even noticing. You wake up thinking of one desire, go to bed imagining another, and throughout the day your mind drifts between fantasies, fears, what-ifs, and half-formed visions. And from the outside, this looks like enthusiasm. But internally it feels like static, a kind of vibrational noise that keeps you busy without ever allowing you to immerse yourself fully in any single end state. This is where the first hidden block appears, the fear of choosing, the fear of committing to one desire long enough to feel its weight, its texture, its inevitability. The fear that if you choose one, you might lose another. That fear fractures your energy, and what you call stagnation is often the simple consequence of divided attention. This hidden block goes deeper than indecision. It touches the very structure of identity. Most people scatter their energy because they don't yet trust that they can sustain the version of themselves who actually has what they want. They unconsciously resist focusing on one end because a part of them whispers, "What if I can't maintain it? What if it collapses?" And so the mind jumps from desire to desire, never staying anywhere long enough for the new identity to take root. This is where the parental investment theory of desire becomes more than a concept. The mind commits deeply only to the desires it believes it can hold. If your identity disagrees with the desire, if it sees it as too big, too far, too foreign, the desire collapses before you even begin to embody it. Not because you don't deserve it, but because the inner structure hasn't accepted it as something you can live with. And here lies the quiet truth most people never realize. Wanting more does not accelerate manifestation, it dilutes it. The idea that you must manifest everything simultaneously is a misunderstanding of consciousness. Manifestation is not a race, it is a state of being. You don't manifest faster by adding more desires to your list. You manifest faster by saturating your inner world with the feeling of one fulfilled desire until it becomes the dominant vibration. That one state of certainty then begins to shift your relationship with all other areas of life. It becomes proof, not theory, and proof gives birth to authority. Once authority emerges, the law moves effortlessly because your nervous system finally has a reference point of what it feels like to embody the end. This is why the most transformative pattern break is deceptively simple. Choose one desire for a short, sacred period of your life. 7 to 10 days. Not forever. Just long enough for your internal world to reorganize itself around one single clear end. This is not suppression, nor limitation. It is focus. It is coherence. It is training the mind to live inside a specific vibration long enough for the subconscious to accept it as truth. During these days, you don't abandon your other desires. You simply allow one of them to become the anchor state, the root from which the rest will eventually emerge. When you commit in this way, the desire stops being a hope and starts becoming a felt reality. Think of it like trying to light a fire in the middle of a forest. If you move the match from branch to branch, nothing ignites. The match burns out before any flame catches, but if you hold the flame against one log long enough, the fire begins. It grows, it spreads, and once it spreads, one flame becomes enough to warm the entire space. Manifestation follows the same law. One desire held deeply becomes the foundation for all the others. And the moment you stop scattering your attention, something remarkable happens. Clarity returns. The mind relaxes. The body loosens. The inner world begins to quiet down. And the desire that once felt distant begins to breathe inside you as if it has already taken form. This is the beginning of inner coherence. This is the beginning of real manifestation. There comes a moment in every manifestation journey when the desire you've been holding begins to shift its position inside you. At first it feels distant, fragile, almost like a dream you're trying not to crush with your own doubt. You approach it with caution, with longing, with a subtle fear of being disappointed. And so your imagination becomes something you visit rather than inhabit, something you touch lightly rather than lean into with your full weight. This is why so many people stop imagining long before the state has a chance to crystallize. The wish still feels extraordinary, and because it feels extraordinary, the nervous system cannot yet call it home. What you call lack of results is often just the discomfort of stepping into a reality that has not become natural to your body. The desire is not resisting you. You are resisting the unfamiliarity of having it. This resistance is not weakness. It is a predictable response of a mind that has been trained to expect only what it has known. Your inner world interprets the extraordinary as a threat, even when it is something you deeply want. This is why the Galatea effect matters here. Your self-expectation becomes the quiet architect of your life. When you expect the desire to arrive, your inner posture changes. Your breath changes. The way you interpret daily events changes. But when the desire still feels special, rare, almost sacred in a distant way, your expectation cannot settle into it. It remains something you reach for, not something you return to. The law responds to expectation, not hope. And expectation is born only when the desired state begins to feel natural. Naturalness is not boredom. Naturalness is arrival. It is the moment when you no longer carry the emotional tension of wanting. You no longer oscillate between imagining and doubting. You no longer feel the gap between who you are and who you are becoming. Naturalness feels like a gentle click inside you, a quiet alignment that whispers, "Of course this is mine." And when that whisper appears, even subtly, the entire energetic field reorganizes. You stop searching for signs because the desire itself becomes the sign. You stop measuring progress because the end state already feels lived. Neville always said that the feeling of naturalness is the secret doorway, the moment when imagination ceases to be effortful and becomes the background tone of your being. To reach that tone, you don't need intensity, you need familiarity. Imagine remembering a moment in your life that once felt unbelievable, a relationship, a job, a move, an opportunity, and notice how ordinary it feels now. At the time, you may have felt unprepared, nervous, overwhelmed, but time allowed your nervous system to integrate the new reality. What once felt like a miracle now feels like part of your story. That shift from extraordinary to ordinary is the exact process manifestation requires. This is the essence of the normalization drill, recalling a past upgrade that once felt surreal and allowing your body to remember what it felt like when that dream became normal. When you bring that emotional memory into the present, your current desire stops feeling foreign. It begins to feel familiar, possible, even expected. Think of moving to a new city. During the first week, everything feels heightened. The streets, the sounds, the people, even the way sunlight hits the buildings. You walk with a sense of novelty and uncertainty, but after a month, something changes. You know which turns lead home. You know where to buy your morning coffee. The new becomes known. The foreign becomes yours. This is naturalness in its purest form. It doesn't come from force, it comes from immersion. The desire becomes natural not because you push harder, but because you dwell in it long enough for your inner world to adopt it as truth. When the wish stops feeling special and starts feeling inevitable, manifestation ceases to be a hope and becomes a quiet internal fact. And the world, obedient as always, catches up to that internal fact with precision. There is a quiet frustration that grows inside anyone who's been visualizing for months yet feels life remains mostly unchanged. It's not that they don't imagine. It's that they imagine only in brief, delicate moments, like touching the surface of warm water without ever stepping in. They create the scene. They feel a flicker of emotion, but the moment ends, and their awareness rushes back to the identity they have lived in for years. The old self, with its habits of doubt and its subtle memories of limitation, takes over by default. And so, even though they glimpse the wish fulfilled, they spend most of their day living from the old state. This is the hidden block Neville referred to again and again. You cannot experience the end if you keep returning to the middle. The imagination must become a place you live from, not a place you occasionally visit. This is where the body and the mind reveal a truth most people overlook. The brain doesn't rewire itself through ideas. It rewires through repeated emotional states. Emotional memory. Encoding is the foundation of identity. The feelings you return to daily become the architecture of your expectations. If you only feel the wish fulfilled during a short meditation, but spend the rest of your day referencing the old self, the emotional imprint remains unchanged. Intellectually, you know the law. Energetically, you are still waiting, and waiting is the vibration of absence. That is why Neville insisted that the end must become your dwelling place, not your escape. When you live from the end, the middle does not have room to linger. It dissolves because your inner world no longer supports it. This shift becomes clearer the moment you understand that the middle only exists when the end is not fully inhabited. The middle is uncertainty. The middle is how will it happen. The middle is the silent fear that the desire is still fragile. But when you immerse yourself so deeply in the end that it becomes your emotional home, the middle loses its relevance. You stop asking how, you stop measuring progress, you stop comparing your current reality to your imagined one. The desire becomes a lived truth inside you, and the outer world begins to unconsciously rearrange itself around that truth. The identity that once waited becomes the identity that already is, and the universe responds to identity, not effort. To experience this level of immersion, simplicity becomes your greatest ally. The 2-minute identity teleport works because it bypasses complexity. Instead of building elaborate scenes, you choose one simple moment that would exist only if your desire were already fulfilled. A hand on your shoulder, a message on your phone, a quiet smile reflected in a mirror. You close your eyes and enter that moment fully, without narration, without explanation, without needing it to make logical sense. You feel the atmosphere of it. You linger long enough for your breath to shift, long enough for your body to soften into it, long enough for your inner world to say, "This is mine now." And you return to that moment multiple times a day, not with strain, but with recognition, the way you revisit a memory you love because it belongs to you. Imagine stepping onto a stage where the script has already been written and the ending has already been decided. The lights rise, the audience watches, and you simply enter the role that was prepared for you. You don't question the plot. You don't negotiate the scenes. You embody the character because the story is already complete. This is how manifestation works when the end state becomes your emotional home. You are not building a future. You are stepping into a role that already exists in consciousness. The middle collapses because the ending has been accepted. And when the ending is accepted, all that remains is the gentle unfolding of what has already been created within you. There is a quiet crossroads many seekers eventually reach, where they realize that accumulating spiritual information has not translated into inner transformation. The teachings are profound, the concepts are beautiful, and the mind feels stimulated, yet the lived reality remains untouched. This happens because listening is effortless, while embodying a new state requires emotional participation. The intellect collects ideas, but identity shifts only through experience. You may feel momentary inspiration while consuming content, but inspiration without immersion fades quickly, leaving the old self intact beneath the surface. The hidden block is subtle. The mind mistakes familiarity for mastery. It believes that because you have heard something many times, you have become it. This is the illusion of mastery bias, and it creates a comforting but misleading sense of progress. You feel engaged, but there is no actual inner movement. The law doesn't respond to how much you know. It responds to the state you occupy. Neville never taught from theory. He taught from experience. Without stepping into the wish fulfilled, no amount of learning can change the subconscious patterns that shape your daily life. This is why passive learning eventually becomes an obstacle. It replaces practice with preparation, embodiment with gathering, imagination with intellectualization. You find yourself constantly seeking clarity, yet clarity only arises when you live from the end. Thinking about the wish fulfilled is not the same as dwelling in it. Understanding the mechanism of revision is not the same as using it when life contradicts your desire. The shift into a new reality begins the moment you stop studying the path and start walking it, even if your steps feel small and unsteady. Imagine dedicating a single day to turning inward rather than outward, a day without searching for new information, a day where imagination becomes your response to doubt, a day where you revise instead of analyze, embody instead of observe. This simple change exposes how much of your spiritual practice relied on consumption rather than creation. It reveals the restlessness that appears when the mind can no longer hide behind information, and in that stillness, you begin to sense the emergence of a new inner authority, the one Neville spoke about so often. It is the difference between reading about swimming and entering the water. Once the body touches the experience, everything changes. Manifestation works the same way. The law becomes real when you participate in it, when you inhabit the end, when you feel the shift instead of thinking about it. Passive learning may introduce the path, but only embodiment takes you home. There are experiences in your past that still breathe inside you, not because they hold any real power now, but because the emotional tone you once assigned to them remains active in your subconscious. These memories create a familiar atmosphere, and without realizing it, you continue to respond to life from the same emotional frequency they established. This is the hidden block that makes stepping into a new identity feel difficult. It is not the past event itself that keeps resurfacing. It is the emotional imprint your body learned to anticipate. Neuroscience offers a liberating insight into this. Memories are not fixed. Through memory reconsolidation, each recalled moment becomes fluid for a brief opening, allowing the brain to rewrite the emotional meaning attached to it. This is exactly what Neville understood when he taught revision. He wasn't asking you to deny your past. He was inviting you to reclaim authorship over the feelings that shaped it. When you revise, you are not escaping reality. You are dissolving the emotional momentum that ties you to an outdated self-image. The subconscious does not distinguish between what happened and what is vividly felt. It adopts the dominant emotional version. This is why the past becomes programmable. Once you realize the emotional charge can be altered, the narrative loses its authority. The moment you introduce a new feeling into an old scene, you signal to your subconscious that the old interpretation is no longer valid. And as that emotional tone shifts, the identity that used to be anchored in those memories begins to loosen. The new state, the one aligned with your desire, finds space to emerge naturally, without being dragged back by the residue of old conclusions. At the end of the day, when the mind softens and becomes more receptive, you can take a single moment that contradicted your desired state and reshape it from the perspective of the wish fulfilled. You imagine the conversation unfolding differently, or your reaction embodying greater confidence, or the situation resolving in your favor. You breathe into that new version until it feels coherent, until it feels like the only version your inner world wants to keep. With time, this becomes more than a nightly adjustment. It becomes an emotional discipline that allows you to build an inner history that supports, rather than undermines, the life you are creating. Revision is like editing a film. You remove the scenes that distort the story and replace them with the ones that align with the truth you have chosen to live. Through this quiet reorientation, the past stops echoing through your present, and the future you desire begins to feel like the only narrative that makes sense. There is a quiet misunderstanding at the core of most manifestation struggles, the belief that each desire requires its own method, its own frequency, its own emotional preparation. This fragments your inner world and makes you approach every goal as if you must start from zero. But manifestation is not a series of isolated tasks. It is the expression of a single center of gravity, your identity. When one desire becomes real within you, truly real, not imagined briefly but lived internally, it creates a shift that extends far beyond that single area. What changes is not the desire. What changes is you. And the version of you who can sustain one fulfilled state can sustain many. This is where the first hidden block appears. People forget that identity is the engine behind all manifestation. They treat money, relationships, healing, confidence, and purpose as separate journeys, not recognizing that it is the same consciousness experiencing all of them. If the identity is anchored in limitation, each desire feels like a new mountain to climb. But when the identity shifts into a state of inner sufficiency, everything begins to organize around that tone. This is why one success, even a small one, has the power to transform your entire emotional landscape. The moment you experience yourself as someone who can create, a new internal pattern becomes available. Psychology calls this the halo effect. When one significant change in a person's life alters the way they perceive themselves across multiple areas, it is not the external event itself that spreads, it is the identity behind it. A person who sees themselves as competent in one domain unconsciously carries that competence into others. The same is true with manifestation. The certainty you felt when one desire blossomed inside you can be transferred. The emotional posture that allowed the first state to settle can be replicated. You do not need a new technique for every dream. You need to extract the essence of the state you have already mastered. Imagine taking a moment from a past manifestation, something you once longed for that eventually became natural, and identifying the qualities you embodied during that transition. Perhaps it was calm, perhaps it was quiet expectancy, Perhaps it was the soft confidence that emerges when you stop chasing and begin allowing. These qualities are not tied to the specific desire. They are expressions of a deeper identity that had already begun to awaken. When you consciously apply these qualities to a new desire, you are not forcing anything. You are transferring a pattern your subconscious already recognizes as true. Think of it like copying a template in design software. You can change the colors, the content, the context, but the structure remains the same. Once your consciousness has mastered the structure of one fulfilled state, that structure becomes universal. It becomes the blueprint. And as you apply it again and again, you begin to realize something profound. You were never trying to manifest separate desires. You were learning how to inhabit a version of yourself capable of holding them all. There is a quiet hesitation many people carry when it comes to manifestation. Beneath the techniques and the affirmations lives a deeper fear, the fear that the law might not respond to them. This fear creates avoidance. Instead of applying the teachings, the mind searches for new information, hoping to feel prepared enough before finally acting. But preparation alone does not create inner authority. The hidden block is the belief that understanding is enough, when the law only becomes real through lived experience. True confidence emerges when you test the law directly. Self-determination. Theory explains that autonomy grows through action, not anticipation. When you imagine a small, simple event and see it unfold in your life, the subconscious receives something it cannot dismiss: evidence. That evidence becomes a new internal reference point, a quiet recognition that creation is possible for you, not just in theory but in practice. It shifts your identity from someone who hopes to someone who operates. Each small test strengthens this internal certainty. You begin to feel less like an observer of life and more like its author. The outer manifestation matters far less than the inner shift it produces. Through repetition, your imagination becomes familiar territory, not a place of doubt. And in this familiarity, the discipline of the law stops feeling like effort and becomes the natural expression of who you are. There comes a point on the spiritual path when you realize that imagination cannot remain a brief ritual performed once a day. For manifestation to become natural, the inner world must rise to a position of quiet dominance. Most people live in reverse. They let the external world dictate their emotions, their expectations, and their sense of what is possible. This creates a constant tug-of-war between what they want to assume and what they see. The hidden block is not a lack of desire, but the reflex of giving more authority to appearances than to inner truth. Philosophers like Alan Watts reminded us that reality is not an isolated structure, but a relationship between perception and meaning. Your assumptions are the lens through which the world acquires shape. When the external receives more attention than the internal, manifestation slows, not because the desire is wrong, but because consciousness remains divided. The shift begins when you allow your chosen state to become the reference point for how you interpret every moment. Instead of reacting toward your desire, you respond from it. This is where inner priority becomes transformative. When you pause before reacting and quietly return to the feeling of the fulfilled state, you teach your body to remain loyal to your chosen identity. Over time, this loyalty becomes instinctive. The outer world loses its power to sway you because the inner world has become your anchor. Think of a ship guided by a small rudder. The mechanism is subtle, almost invisible, yet it determines the entire direction of the vessel. Your assumptions operate the same way. Once the inner state leads, the outer world follows with precision. Neville's teaching rests on a single truth: live in the end until it becomes your nature. One fulfilled desire reveals the feeling tone you can replicate everywhere. When repetition, emotion, and coherence align, identity shifts. And when identity shifts, the world simply follows the state you have already claimed as yours. Subscribe to Live from Your Inner Power now.